Good afternoon. We are in online studio of Strategy 2050, and today we have Director General of Aviation Administration of Kazakhstan, Mr. Peter Griffits. Hello.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
All right, good. Excellent.
Okay, shall we start?
Go ahead.
Mr. Griffiths, how do you evaluate the losses of aviation industry during COVID-19 in the world and in Kazakhstan particularly, in your opinion?
I think we can now very safely say that this is the worst disaster that has happened to the airline industry since the end of global World War II. The effect to the airline industry has been huge and still continues to affect it in quite a big way. When you look at the overall passenger numbers, with the overall reduction to 2.8 billion passengers, you can see straight away that this has got a massive effect on the airline industry. And you've seen all sorts of airlines make adjustments to that. British Airways put away some of its 747 fleet early. You've seen airlines such as Lufthansa and that seriously downsizing the size of their fleet. Air France has curtailed a lot of its activity and has now received government support to keep them operating. Certainly during my working life in the airline industry, this is probably the biggest event that we have ever seen. Here in Kazakhstan, we're not immune. We've seen similar things here in Kazakhstan. Air Astana downsizing its fleet. SCAT has been parking some of its aircraft. And the big low-cost carriers like EasyJet, Ryanair, AirAsia, all of them have been parking large parts of their fleet. So it has had a massive effect. It's probably the largest transportation system that's been affected by COVID. So in a global impact terms, it has really stopped aviation from operating in the way that we've got used to it operating. I'm sure that all of you wish to travel and you found it extremely difficult to do so.
How do you think these consequences will be prolonged? For how many years, in your opinion?
It's always a difficult guess to see how quickly aviation comes back. Aviation has got two particular drivers. You have to look at the passenger numbers and you have to look at the freight. Freight will often drive some of the business traffic. So the big thing is to see when business starts traveling again. The problem is that business has actually adjusted quite a lot to operating in a COVID environment. And I suspect that some of the business that we saw prior to the events, you probably will not see back at all. I'm pretty sure that because we've changed activity, that we'll see that that activity will remain. And the reason I'm happy to say that with some confidence is you will recall that in Europe, we shut down all of the European flights at one stage because of a volcano that was causing a problem with air traffic services over Europe. And during that event, we actually saw that some of the business went away and didn't return. So I'm pretty sure with this event, we'll see the same thing, a decline in business travel. Business travel is a primary driver of a lot of the premium airlines, and you may not see that come back. We've already seen some big changes in Europe with Heathrow Airport losing its #1 spot as the largest international airport in the world. Now it's Paris. So we're already seeing a movement of traffic there. So I expect to see many other things happen during that time. In terms of the recovery period, when you look at the amount of money that we've lost within the airline industry, it could take anything now up to 10 years to recover all of those losses. People were predicting a few months back before the second wave that it would take 3 to 4 years to recover. And now we're seeing a second wave, and this will probably run all the way through the winter. it probably will take a lot longer than that. So I wouldn't be surprised to see it take 10 years to recover to pre-2019 levels.
How the industry is going to tackle the problem in particular, and in Kazakhstan as well?
Well, Kazakhstan aviation industry is still quite buoyant, and that's because it's a big country and it requires an aviation system to support it. So to a certain extent, the carriers here are protected a little bit from the problems of Europe, where all traffic is international traffic. So here in Kazakhstan, we still have a very heavy traffic level between Almaty and Nursultan. I was traveling last 2 days down to Shymkent, and the aircraft were all heavily loaded. So we're still seeing quite a heavy domestic market still operating here, and that's continuing to expand. And very shortly we'll be opening Turkestan Airport as we finish the certification of that. So that's anticipated that will start operations on the 1st of December. So we're expecting to see that domestic market grow a little bit. But it's the international market which we're still struggling with. Both eastbound and westbound from Kazakhstan, we don't have that many services operating. So it is important for the economy of Kazakhstan to get those services back in as soon as it's practical and safe to do so. So you've seen various countries like Turkey turn on services and then turn them off again. We have limited services into Europe at the moment, and it's quite important that we get those back for the international work that is done by Kazakhstan. A lot of the European markets are still big markets for Kazakhstan to operate in. A lot of people want to travel there. So once it's safe for them to do so, I expect to see that traffic level come back. I'm not so sure you're going to see the same sort of recovery in Europe. We are seeing it in China. So when you look at the amount of aircraft that are flying around China, then that's recovering. We've seen quite a bit of recovery in the Russian Federation to the north of us. So again, the sort of eastern part of Europe is working quite well, but you're not seeing that recovery at all in Western Europe. And that's because they have alternative forms of transport like rail and road. So I think you're going to see a lot slower recovery in the Western markets than you will here.
What do you see as the biggest obstacles and risks for the recovery?
The main obstacle is when our government's confident that we can start to travel again. We've seen literally in the last few days, Pfizer have come out with a statement about that their vaccine is now 90% effective. So this is good news for all of the economies around the world. But again, the main problem that you see with that is production levels that they're talking about at the moment is nowhere near enough to look after a global environment. So there's going to be a slow ramp up there. And this is going to slow down recovery mechanisms where we put back in international travel. So that's a bit of good news, but again, it's tempered by the fact that we don't have the production levels in order to be able to protect everything. So until there's confidence that we have no more disease transmission across international borders, then countries are going to be fairly reluctant to allow international travel unless they are assured of that. We've seen that recently with Korea, for example, who are looking to reduce the traffic loads into Korea so that they don't transfer an awful lot of passengers with COVID-related symptoms. Mm-hmm. So that's the first part of it. The second part of that is when you have such a long period where airlines are unable to operate, it means that a lot of their crews actually go out of check. And here in Kazakhstan, we don't have a huge amount of simulators. So the simulators to be able to test and check our crews are often based in other countries. Now, with some of the larger aircraft, they're not very far away. They're in places like Uzbekistan, and we've got simulators in Istanbul. But for some of the types, such as the CRJ, which is operated by SCAT, that is based in Berlin, and currently we can't get crews to Berlin to be able to do their checks. Now, eventually they get to a point where we can't fly them anymore, and so we actually do the testing. So getting the crews back and tested is going to be a major obstacle to getting things up and running here. And we may need to look at different ways of doing that in order to support the Kazakhstan industry, and that's something that we're working on at the moment. So we've got some indicative signs that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that we might be seeing the end of the COVID crisis within the next 6 months or so, but still it's early days and it's really difficult to predict when that end is going to come. And then there are some fairly fundamental things that we have to do in order to make it work again.
Talking about safety, how is the safety of flights are supported during pandemia in Kazakhstan? And what do you think will change once and for all in terms of safety and sanitary norms in aviation industry?
I think certainly in the overall safety effect of what we're doing is actually quite good. And because people are getting used to complying with it, and I suspect that you will see some of the things that we've done during the COVID period will be brought in. You've seen a lot of research as well into disease transmission on board the aircraft. If you recall, when we first reinstated all of the flights, there was a big concern about separation on board the aircraft. That we wanted to leave large spaces between individual passengers. This obviously affects the airline economics, because if you reduce the amount of passengers on board that are paying for that service, you get to a point below which you can't pay for the services of that aircraft. And that affects the safety, because we're not able to pay for the things that we need to pay for to keep aircraft in check, to keep crews in check. And then that has a big knock-on effect. But you've seen a lot of things change over that. The wearing of masks on board now seems to have become fairly standard. People are not causing problems with that. We've seen people doing a lot of personal hygiene on board the aircraft to make sure that they're looked after. We've seen engineering teams doing additional cleaning on the airplane, and that has had a good effect. We see changes in the filters and that on board the aircraft, heater filters, and that has had an effect. So some of these things will remain after the COVID conditions have gone away, and this will help overall with disease transmission on board. Don't forget, COVID is not the only thing that we catch by this mechanism. We get colds and flu, and various other diseases are transmitted in the same way. So anything that works towards keeping everybody safe on board and happy that they are being looked after is actually quite a good thing. So I'm pretty sure that some of these will remain in place long after COVID restrictions have gone.
Right. Taking into account your experience, how do you evaluate the perspectives of the country in terms of increasing flight safety indicator?
Well, flight safety is generally improving across the board as we bring in new mechanisms that we as a regulator have started to introduce, and many of the things are interaction with other countries. So during the startup of the COVID crisis, Kazakhstan was invited to be a member of CAPSCO because AAK was the coordinating body here for Kazakhstan. And CAPSCO was the method that we used to integrate with WHO and also the ICAO. So we were able to adopt really quickly to mechanisms that were required internationally, and that made life an awful lot easier for the industry here. So we were able to publish all of that material so that people were able to get high quality information really quickly. So those safety mechanisms won't go away just because we've gone out of COVID. And recently, we've also been invited to join the European Civil Aviation Conference, which is the first time that Kazakhstan has been offered an opportunity to be an observer member state. This is another big step forward for us because it means that we become part of the strategic thinking of the whole of Europe, where Kazakhstan can go and participate with all of the other Director Generals from around all the other countries in Europe. I was former Director General Civil Aviation UK. I used to sit on there on behalf of the UK. So it's a great pleasure to take Kazakhstan into the same group, which has such an important role in Europe in coordinating the safety, security, and training issues for the whole of the European region. So it's quite a big step forward, and all of that has been enabled because as we went into the COVID crisis, we had to interact far more with all of the other countries of the world. And as a result of that, Kazakhstan was recognized for its skill and expertise in this area. People think that aviation in this country is actually quite small. It isn't. It's quite a big aviation system. It ranks in the top 20 in the world, so it's not a small airline industry that's pushed to one side. It moves a lot of people for the size of the population. It moves an awful lot of people. So it's quite a big voice in the region. So it's quite important that that voice is heard in many places, not just in ICAO, but also in EASA, the European Aviation Safety Agency, and ICAO. So a lot of things have changed as a result of COVID. A lot of things we accelerated during that period. And I'm pleased to say that all of these mechanisms will be embedded within what we do here in AAK, so that they're left long after we've finished dealing with COVID.
Thank you. It is our pleasure that you are here with us. So Aviation Administration of Kazakhstan was founded recently, 1 year ago in August 2019. And what are the plans, what have been done in 1 year, and what are the plans for future?
Okay, so we've done quite a lot of work during the year. Probably the biggest piece of events that people have seen us work on was the crash of the Beck Air on the 27th of December last year. This was quite a significant piece of work, and it was very early on in our life cycle. So it was a big strain on the organisation to be able to deal with an accident of that magnitude. I'm pleased to say that working with a lot of the other ministries, we've worked with the Ministry of Interior, CAC, transport prosecutors, plus many other people from across other parts of the European theatre. We've been able to piece together that particular accident in conjunction with all of the investigative teams to look at all of those issues. So that was probably the biggest piece of work that we did. But it's not the only piece of work that we did. You also saw us investigating Libyan sanctions issues, and this was 3 airlines that were reported to us by the United Nations, who in their opinion were breaching the sanctions requirements. This took a lot of expertise to deal with because it's not something which a lot of people are familiar with. So this took quite a long time to investigate on behalf of Kazakhstan, and we've taken action on that. But that again is not the baseline of the work. 331 inspections have been done on all sorts of airlines, airports, manufacturers, people carrying out maintenance organizations. And during that time, 3,379 interventions were made by the organization here to ensure that safety was maintained. So it is something that we've spent a huge amount of time on ensuring that the inspection levels and the activity of the inspectors to protect society from safety-related activities is at a high level. In addition to that, we've been training people. So we've carried out 108 training courses so far for a large portion of our staff, and we have 142 staff today by comparison to the 1 staff member that we had on 1st of August last year. That was me. So in terms of the workload of the organisation, it has been quite heavy. We've carried out 3,280 public services on e-licence, and out of that, 922 resulted in cancellation actions because they weren't able to meet their requirements. So These relate to personal licensing and things like that. So a lot of work has been done by the organisation in the year, and we still expect to keep on building that workload to be a comparable level to any other country in the world with an aviation system that's this big.
So what are the plans for the future?
So we will continue on expanding. So we will go up to 175 staff. And then we start work on improving the industry. So to date, you've seen us working on building the AAK. So during the first year, it was a case of getting enough staff in with the aptitude to be regulators, and it's been working on training them and putting in the systems for them to be able to work. The next part is to start working with our industry to improve the standards within the industry so that we can get everybody operating to the same level. So from Aerosonde right way through to AN2 operations, we're all maintaining a high aviation standard. So that's the focus for the next year. We have a strategy for delivering that, which has been signed off by the board, and we're starting to communicate that now with our aviation industry. We started recently with the airlines. Our next intervention will be with the airports, where we start talking about their strategic issues, and then we move into air traffic control and the general aviation community. All of them are really important factors within the whole aviation industry here, and we expect to have all of that work completed before the end of the year as we start to move into a strategic picture for the airline industry of targeting safety-related issues so that we can try and reduce them.
Well, we wish you a good luck in all the plans, and thank you for a nice interview.
You're very welcome. Always nice to talk to you.